High-profile resignations, national security leaks, eye-popping headlines. Has the U.S. news media got its mojo back? The Investigators starts now.
CNN is learning, according to two sources, that Michael Flynn has resigned.
Leaks are endemic to Washington, D.C. Leaks happen, and they will continue to happen.
I've actually called the Justice Department to look into the leaks. Those are criminal leaks.
It's a scary thing to hear that, there might be leak investigations.
The false reporting by the media, by you people, the false, horrible, fake reporting.
Trump continues to try to delegitimize and dehumanize the press, but a lot of these stories are out of his control now.
I'm Diana Swain. We're the Investigators. This is what we do. Put aside your politics, and you have to feel for President Donald Trump. Even by his own admission, his administration is leaking classified information on an almost daily basis. And those leaks are leading to some extraordinary headlines for investigative journalists.
And this is big breaking news because according to two sources, they're telling CNN that Michael Flynn has resigned.
In fact, it now seems clear Trump asked his national security advisor to resign for misleading the White House about contact he had with Russia's ambassador to the U.S. in the weeks leading up to the inauguration.
The evolving and eroding level of trust as a result of this situation is what led the president to ask for General Flynn's resignation.
At the heart of the scandal, allegations that Flynn and the Russian ambassador discussed sanctions imposed by Barack Obama over alleged hacking by Russia. If true, it's a violation of U.S. law for an incoming administration to undercut the work of a sitting president. But the conversations only came to light because reporters published the story.
A big moment for investigative journalism. If it weren't for journalists digging into this, we wouldn't know about it. So when you hear about anonymous sources, when you hear about leaks from the White House or from the government, this is what that's so important.
The Washington Post and New York Times have been leading the reporting on the Flynn scandal. Adam Entis is one of the Post reporters who's been on this story. Adam, it seems that we are hearing about leaks out of the White House on a near daily basis now. Give us some context. Just how leaky is this administration?
Yeah, I mean, I think all administrations have their leaks. There certainly has been a large number in these opening weeks of the Trump administration. I do think you kind of have different kinds of leaks going on here. You have the kinds that I think that the Trump administration wants out there, and then you have kinds that they don't want out there. And so obviously what we've been reporting here when it comes to the National Security Advisor Flynn is the variety that they did not want to come out.
Of course, the story being published is not the end. It's often the beginning of the reaction. So let's pause for a minute and listen to what Donald Trump had to say in reaction.
I think it's very, very unfair what's happened to General Flynn, the way he was treated, and the documents and papers that were illegally, I stress that, illegally leaked.
Now, Trump is saying that the papers should apologize for publishing what he calls illegal information. Is there any consideration for journalists in that?
Well, certainly. I mean, it's a scary thing to hear that there might be leak investigations. Certainly, we as journalists increasingly take precautions to try to protect our sources and to protect ourselves. But nonetheless, to have a free press where we feel like we can pursue stories, and the idea that the administration would pursue the journalists for doing that, and the people that they talk to, it's obviously could have an impact to make it harder for us to do our jobs.
There's sort of a journalistic shorthand, I find, that we start talking about leaks as though everybody should know precisely what that means behind the scenes. Give us a sense of what's actually happening. Are people getting the quintessential brown envelope, phone calls? Is it from people you know, people you've never heard of?
No, I mean, I think it depends on the journalist. I mean, I'm an intel reporter. I've been covering intelligence now for close to 10 years, and so I get to know people that are in various branches of the government, who are, obviously seeing things that they feel like they believe should be out there. that would otherwise be suppressed. I'm sure there are other journalists who are getting envelopes. I haven't been a recipient of any envelopes. There's just so much distrust in Washington right now. Frankly, I've never seen anything like it, and it's quite scary for us as journalists to be in the middle of it.
And now that we see that the White House is moving ever more aggressively to try to figure out who's leaking and one has to assume some pretty strong action against them, do you suspect that those leaks will dry up or that people will push back?
Frankly, I don't know. It could go either way. I mean, I think it could come in phases where maybe things quiet down for a bit and then things open up again. It's really hard to know how this is going to play out.
Adam, good to talk to you. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Donald Trump has been president for less than a month, and each day, it seems, his new administration has grabbed headlines.
The New York Times citing current and former U.S. officials reporting Trump campaign aides and senior Russian intelligence officials were in contact repeatedly during the campaign.
The Associated Press reported today that Donald Trump threatened to send U.S. troops to Mexico to stop, quote, bad hombres down there.
Leaks and anonymous sources have played a key role, but so has a recommitment to investigative journalism. Several news outlets have recently beefed up their ranks in reaction to a hostile pushback.
The president's top aide just told the New York Times that the press should keep its mouth shut. No. Fact-checking
what the president says has taken on a new life. Daniel Dale of the Toronto Star is one of the reporters tasked with doing that. So does he think old-fashioned gumshoe journalism is having a renaissance? So let's start there. I mean, take those headlines and the headlines of the past week, the sense that the media is now starting to drive the narrative again. Have journalists gotten their mojo back?
I've pushed back on the notion that journalists lost their mojo. I think a ton of good journalism was done during the Trump campaign. We found out about his boasting about what seemed to be sexual assault. We found out about his $900 million tax loss in 1995. But I do think that now we are seeing this proliferation of really good investigative work, driven in part by shoe leather reporting, driven in part by good sourcing inside this very leaky, very chaotic administration. So journalism is far from dead, if anyone said it was.
But do you sense a difference from, call it 6 months ago, when the primaries were underway and we would see these rallies, the Trump rallies, where the news media was penned in, people were yelling at them, and there was this very strange, often scary dynamic. Do you have a sense that the journalists maybe have their footing back?
Well, I think it's different when you have a president whose actions you can focus on rather than the drama and the chaos of a campaign environment where they can pen you in every day and turn you more easily into sort of a visual, identifiable hate object. Trump continues to try to delegitimize and dehumanize the press, but a lot of these stories are out of his control now because you have an entire apparatus around the president. You have hundreds of people in this sort of inner sanctum. Any one of those people is someone who can talk to a journalist. Any one of those people is someone who might have a tidbit of information that can lead to a big story. So, the news is sort of out of his grasp.
So many people have drawn parallels between Donald Trump and the late Rob Ford. And if anyone could really speak to that, it's you, because you had a pretty testy relationship with Ford. Do you see any similarities here?
I do. There are days, and there have been for the last year and a half, where I've just been like, oh my gosh, this is eerily reminiscent of what we saw in Toronto. From the way that they personally attack reporters by name, outlets by name, the way they engender this kind of fierce loyalty among this extremely devoted base, even as other people think they're, eminently unqualified. There's moment after moment where Trump is like Ford. I think they've become more different than similar, though, as time has proceeded. The way Trump has attempted to deliberately stoke bigotry, racial resentment to aid his rise is something, for example, that we never saw Rob Ford do.
You've really carved out a niche and are known to many journalists as well as the guy who's led the kind of fact-checking on Twitter of Trump. But is there a danger in pushing too far, in fact-checking really sort of tiny detail?
I think there is, and I think, when I found myself sort of straining to justify a particular claim of mine that something he said was false, I just abandon it and say it's not worth it. But I don't think that we should ignore little false statements from the president. Think about your own life, whether it's, your social life, your family. It's when someone's telling a little needless lie, about nothing, that sometimes makes you worry and makes you wonder about their character. So when the president, for example, is saying that he won the Michigan Man of the Year award when there's no such award, that some people might say that's little, that's not about policy, but I think it says something about his character. It says something about this man.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you very much.
We continue to dig into a story we brought you last week, questions about who's crossing the border from Canada into the U.S. The reporter who broke the story told us,
no one's trying to throw Canada under the bus.
I don't think that these data are in any way particularly meaningful.
Now this Canadian security expert is responding after the break.
Absolutely, it's stealing money. I mean, people lost big money in this case.
Plus, a CBC News investigation reveals lawyers mishandling clients' money. Just one of 5 things we learned from investigative journalism this week. But first.
Tomorrow they will say, Donald Trump rants and raves at the press. I'm not ranting and raving.
Journalists were almost speechless after Trump's news conference this week.
Well, that was a doozy of a press conference.
Wow. Alrighty then.
For some, it recalled a certain sitcom.
A Festivus.
It was apparently Festivus at the White House today.
Yes, Festivus.
A Festivus for the rest of us.
A made-up holiday on Seinfeld that includes the airing of grievances.
Here, an airing of grievances.
Because the press honestly is out of control. The level of dishonesty is out of control. And the leaks are absolutely real. The news is fake. I inherited a mess.
Let's just hope the president doesn't hear about the other part of Festivus.
And now, as Festivus rolls on, we come to the feats of strength.
Not the feats of strength.
Until you pin me, George, Festivus is not over.
Here are 5 things we learned this week from investigative journalists. Elizabeth Wetlaufer, the Ontario nurse charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder, was fired from a nursing home in 2014 for a medication error that put the life of a resident at risk. That's according to reporting by the Toronto Star. Reuters reported America's biggest banks are asking the U.S. government to ease rules designed to prevent money laundering. Donald Trump has said he wants to cut regulations for Wall Street. Venezuela's government pulled CNN's Spanish-language channel off the air after it ran a story accusing the country's embassy in Iraq of selling passports and visas to suspected terrorists. The Associated Press reported Trinidad and Tobago has become the largest per capita source of recruits for ISIS in the Western Hemisphere. And CBC's The Fifth Estate revealed how some lawyers in Canada have misappropriated tens of millions of dollars of their clients' money. Most of the lawyers who've been disciplined for doing that have never been criminally charged. Is the Canadian border secure enough to prevent suspected terrorists from entering the U.S.? As we showed you last week, a recent report in the U.S. news site The Daily Beast suggested FBI data showed the Canadian border is a problem. Daily Beast reporter Jonna Winter told us last week about her story that claimed FBI documents showed suspected terrorists were being encountered at the Canadian border far more often than the Mexican border.
That there's twice as many, in some cases more than twice as many.
Our interview with Winter was viewed online more than 500,000 times. But could the data have been leaked by someone trying to paint the Canadian border in a bad light? Could it be someone just throwing Canada under the bus?
Respectfully, I think that's ridiculous.
Not according to Christian Leuprecht. The political science professor thinks the Daily Beast report is a, quote, classic case of drawing the wrong inference from data, and that the motive for leaking it was purely political. All right, Christian, let's talk about the data. In your view, what's wrong with it? What's wrong with the way it was positioned in that report?
Well, so there's a couple of dimensions. One is that there's any number of ways you can get on a watch list. But of course, if you're inadmissible to the U.S. or if you're a genuine threat to the U.S., you'll either be turned away or you'll be arrested or at least detained when you're at the border. So these are not individuals that actually pose a genuine, immediate, looming risk or threat to the security of the United States or to the security of Canada, for that matter, because American authorities would communicate that to Canada, given that we have a very close security and intelligence relationship, and nowhere is that relationship closer when it comes to working on counterterrorism. So here's what I think might be going on. The president just days ago signed an authorization to hire 5,000 more Border Patrol agents. And Border Patrol has been a very large boon for peripheral areas in the United States. So between 2001 and 2011, for instance, the investment in Border Patrol and Border Patrol officers grew by some 500%. And about 90% of those resources are invested on the southern border. About 10% of them are invested on the northern border. So if you think about that, that would make about 500 or so of these positions that could potentially be deployed to the northern border.
So to interrupt you, are you saying essentially that this was a play to get jobs on the northern border site?
Right. I think that's sort of the long and short of it, that there's someone who decided that these numbers could be instrumental in shoring up the contingent of Border Patrol officers. And of course, every politician wants to show that on the one hand, they keep America safe, and on the other hand, they bring some pork barrel sort of back to their constituencies. And so I think that's a lot of what's probably at work here.
Now, to be fair to Jonna Winter, what her reporting said was that there were, in many cases, twice as many suspected terrorists, quote, encountered at the Canadian border versus the Mexican border, as opposed to getting across. Does that change your view of them at all?
Look, I don't think that these data are in any way particularly meaningful as a way of assessing the threat or the risk to the United States or to Canada. There are lots of people on watch lists, for instance, because you might not have been able to ascertain in a positive way someone's background over the last 10 years. And so there's a question of whether they could potentially at some point have been involved in some nefarious activity. And so you keep them on a watch list, and you simply see what they are up to in terms of their travel patterns and their interactions, but there's no actual evidence that would warrant making an individual inadmissible or actually arraigning them.
Very quickly, why do you believe this narrative persists post 9/11 that all the bad people are coming from here?
Look, this goes back over 100 years. This is sort of late 19th century in the United States. There's the sense of that America has this civilizing mission. And so all bad things and all bad influences come from outside of the United States. And so if we can only keep those bad influences out, then America itself can remain pure.
Christian, thanks for your take on this.
It's been my pleasure.
That the situation had become unsustainable.
Kellyanne Conway does it, so does her boss.
It's a joke.
But putting a positive spin on the new administration may not be working anymore. My POV just ahead. Plus, you had a question about health reporting.
You can try organizations, societies, foundations.
So we're putting it to a CBC News health reporter. Ask Me Anything is next. First, investigators on assignment. Here's Bob McEwen of the Fifth Estate.
It happened not far from here when the police pulled over a man who was driving erratically. Turns out he already had 2 DUI convictions on his record and didn't want a third. By the time the cop got to his window, he was ready to become an informant. The story he told would be Canadian, American, and Mexican criminal history. The Mennonite Connection. Coming soon on the Fifth Estate.
What we aim to do with this program is to bring you into investigative journalism, essentially pull back the curtain on the work that we do. And one way to do that is to get you to ask us anything about our work. This week, a question about health reporting. When researching stories related to medical issues, how do you find patients for sources, patients with a particular condition that's the subject of your story? It's an interesting question, and we've put it to CBC health reporter Christine Birack.
Health is tricky. We're talking about private, highly sensitive information here. In a lot of cases, people don't want to share it. Usually when we're working on a health story, we're talking to a doctor who's on the front line. And we will ask he or she, do you have a patient that we can talk to who's had the experience? In some cases, the answer is yes. In other cases, it's no. The doctor doesn't feel comfortable asking a patient because they may feel obligated to say yes. In that case, there are other avenues. You can try organizations, societies, foundations. So mental health, diabetes, cancer, they will people often work very hard to try and find you a patient as well. And when that doesn't work, you go online. You look at chat rooms, forums, Facebook groups. Where are people talking about this topic? And then you start messaging them and talking to them. When it really works, you can find a really powerful character to tell the story through, but you've got to be diligent in vetting their story. Make sure there's no other agenda and that they're not trying to push some kind of product. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Christine. Do you have a question about investigative journalism? Here's how you can ask me anything. Email us, investigators@cbc.ca, or send us your question on Twitter @SwainDiana. You've no doubt heard about political operatives who try to spin the media. It's a little like this kid's party game. The operative tries to spin the reporter away from his or her story, spin the narrative onto something more favorable to their boss. Kellyanne Conway, one of Trump's best-known spokespeople, has become something of an urban legend for her never say die approach to spinning.
Sean Spicer, our press secretary, gave alternative facts.
But like most things done well, spinning is an art form. Perhaps Donald Trump thinks he's good at it. How else to explain his answers at 2 high-profile news conferences this week? With Trudeau, he was asked if he believes the border with Canada is secure. Here's part of his answer.
We won by a very, very large electoral college vote.
And a couple days later, while standing with Israel's prime minister, here's Trump's answer to a question about anti-Semitism.
We are, very honored by the victory that we had.
What? It defies even the best spinner to explain how you respond to a question about anti-Semitism or border security with an answer about the size of your electoral win. Now, granted, he's only been in office for a month, but at a certain point, reminding people that you won big league isn't going to spin anyone off their focus. And the headlines this week would suggest it's not working anyway. I'm Diana Swain. We are The Investigators.